This is the Transforming Anxiety podcast with mindfulness teacher Kelly Hanlon McCormick, and today is episode number 261. Let's talk about self-compassion. My intention for this conversation is that we return to this topic, self-compassion, and take a few moments here together. Self-compassion is the foundation for transformation and growth and change. Welcome in. It's the Transforming Anxiety podcast, episode number 261. Let's talk about self-compassion. I'm so glad you're here. Well, hello there. Welcome on in today. I am going to be sharing a talk that I gave to a class, a while back on self-compassion. This was for a how to live more mindfully course. This was just one little section that we did in that class. And I thought as we get into summer, into this brighter, more vibrant, more energetic season that tends to have a lot of going and doing, but it's like different going and doing than what we do through the fall and the winter and the spring. I thought this would be an interesting time, a helpful time to revisit the topic of self-compassion. So also, I'm going to be teaching some mindfulness courses here in the second half of 2024 and wanted to give you a little taste of what some of that can look like in case you're interested in practicing again, in practicing for the first time, in learning more about mindfulness. So here we go. This is a talk I gave on self-compassion. All right. So today we're going to be exploring self-compassion. This is a really important facet of mindfulness and of practicing mindfulness meditation in a more regular and committed way. So we've all tried to beat ourselves up, right? We've tried to talk down to ourselves. We've tried to get sarcastic with ourselves, to berate ourselves. And we do this in an effort to better ourselves. It's like we believe we can hate ourselves into creating a healthy habit, or beat ourselves up and somehow that will make it so that we're more patient with our kids or our partner or our own shortcomings. Like, think of how you talk to yourself all day, every day. That never-ending mental chatter, the inner commentary. It's like a sports commentator calling all the plays in a game, right? But it's your own personal life commentator, making remarks about your every move, your every feeling, your every word. And it's that voice, that inner commentator, that I want to focus on today, that we're going to practice guiding and steering towards more kind language, a more loving approach. This is self-compassion. So when you sit down to meditate, when you start practicing more mindfulness and awareness in your day, one of the first things you notice is there sure are a lot of emotions, like so many feelings. And while it's true that emotions cycle through, more are always coming, it's also true that we tend to get tangled up in the more difficult emotions, that we get stuck and caught up in the more negative side of things. It's not as easy, right? It's not nearly as comfortable. And our brains are wired to get us back to pleasure. We are constantly seeking pleasure, and we're trying to avoid pain. So it makes sense that we got hung up in the negative or intense emotions, the difficulties of life, and that we're looking to get back to the more pleasant feeling states. But what can happen is that with those strong emotions, the fear, the anger, the anxiety, the sadness, there's another layer to the experience, which is we wind up feeling bad about ourselves for the emotion. And that's been called, in the Buddhist tradition, the second arrow. So the first arrow is that we're dealing with tough stuff. And the second arrow is that we don't like ourselves for having that tough stuff. We take it personally and we think there's something wrong with us. We feel like there's a sense of, I feel bad, so I am bad. It's important to recognize that along with difficult emotions, there's often this sinking sense of, I shouldn't be feeling this. And as we begin to work with mindfulness, as we begin to meditate more regularly and notice the emotions and the pain that arises, when there's a transformation towards peace and calm and steadiness and groundedness, the juncture that is always a sign of awakening and of healing is when there is a felt sense of kindness or tenderness towards that pain, towards those negative emotions, towards the reality of the moment that we're in. I try to teach and talk about emotions in a more evolutionary way, a science-backed way, that feelings and emotions aren't personal. It's really just our evolutionary unfolding. When strong emotions take over, when we're struggling or really feeling negative and intense feelings, what's going on is in some way the survival brain is dominating for whatever reason. We're looping outside of our human consciousness, which is what we experience as that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, stress response. And when the survival brain takes over, we're cut off from a more integrated wholeness. We feel really small and really stuck in those big emotions, the fear, the anger, the anxiety when they arise. We don't feel connected to others. We don't feel resourceful or creative or even connected to what we know we've experienced before, which is more of a kind of spaciousness and perspective and even humor or lightness. It's like we're completely cut off. So let's get to self-compassion. We're talking through this struggle, these negative emotions and the intensity, how life can get so lifey. And almost it just takes us down to our knees. And this actually speaks to the alchemy of self-compassion, which is very simply that in order for us to feel compassion towards ourselves, first, there needs to be a contacting of the actual vulnerability that's there. Otherwise, compassion is so abstract. Like, think about it this way. Many of us go around hearing about terrible things and saying, oh, that's awful. But let's just be honest. It's not like our hearts are resonating in a really tender way. For compassion to truly awaken, we have to feel the vulnerability. There has to be contact there. I sometimes think of it as that ouch. Like a lot of the work that we do around here, a lot of what I teach and work with students on is a system of inquiring into who they are, how they think, and what they feel. That whole inner landscape of the self. And this investigation helps us fully contact that vulnerability. So the second part of the alchemy of self-compassion is that there needs to be an active response. It's interesting that the part of the brain that's correlated with compassion is right near the motor cortex, which has to do with activity. So think of something like love. Love has an activity to it. It's not something you just think about or feel, right? There's an action to love. So you could start simply with a question like, what's here? What's happening? What am I believing? From there, you could go deeper. What do I need? What do I wish for? From this kind of inquiry, this is an awakening into the self, right? Into what is. We begin to really practice with compassion. And one of the quickest and easiest ways to imagine what compassion looks like is to begin from this inquiry and then imagine, what would I offer a beloved friend or a partner, a child, a family member in this situation? What would I say to them? How would I approach them? How would I sit with them in this? It's a bridge when we imagine an other. And it's a really powerful and skillful means, an other that we can offer love and nourishment, nurturing towards. When we can imagine it, it's a bridge that dissolves a sense of selflessness, and it allows us to realize or come back home to a larger sense of our own being, our own interconnectedness, our own belonging in the world. So, again, imagine this. What would you say to them? What would you offer them? How would you talk to them? Then all you have to do is swap out their name for your name, and you have the script. You know how to offer compassion. You do it for others all the time. Use an other to write the script. And then you can turn that back to you. You can offer that same compassion to yourself, right? Self-compassion. Now, none of this is a one-shot. It's not a quick one and done thing. It's a practice. Kindness is a practice. Self-compassion is a practice. Just like mindfulness, meditation, yoga, it's all an ongoing practice. So I love this metaphor to think of. Imagine how a piece of cloth becomes dyed indigo. Like there's a vat of dye, and you take this white cloth and you dip it in and you pull it up, and it starts out being this brilliant indigo. But then it fades and it's just a little bit off-white, right? So you do it again. You dip it in, you pull it up, and again, you see that brilliant color. And it fades again, but not quite as much. And you get the idea that each time you dip it in, it holds the dye more until it becomes saturated, right? Infused with that incredible light-filled color. And so it is with us that the more we practice awareness, mindfulness, meditation, kindness, compassion, and self-compassion, the more we practice it, the more we realize that we are that what we're practicing is our home. And it becomes more familiar than any of the expressions of the small self that we were getting caught in. All right, so I want to leave you with a few thoughts, a few ideas on self-compassion. So this first one comes from the queen of self-compassion, Kristin Neff, who literally wrote the book on it. Her first book is called Self-Compassion. She said, "Whenever I notice something about myself I don't like, or whenever something goes wrong in my life, I silently repeat the following phrases. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion I need." All right, this one from Albert Einstein. Hard to argue with this, right? He said, "A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty." All right, lastly, the poet Rumi. This is his poem called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for doing this work alongside me. Thank you for sharing this with your friends and your family, anyone who, could use the support and the guidance, who could use these teachings and practices. Thank you for sharing your stories with me, telling me about your experiences and asking your questions. I'm here with you. Let's do this together. Transforming anxiety.